Hello and welcome to another edition of the All Nations Church podcast. I'm James Aubrey. I'm joined today by Kier Adams.
Hello, hello.
And we're still in season 4 of the All Nations Church podcast, looking at the various gifts that Christ has given to his body in Ephesians chapter 4. And we're very pleased to welcome a special guest to the podcast who you've heard from already in this series, our good friend David Lyon.
Hello, great to be with you again.
David.
Great to have you with us, David. We had a fantastic time in the first episode of the series looking at what the Bible says from Ephesians 4 about these gifts and tracing some of the history of how the gifts were recognized and released in the New Testament, how they were lost over time and how they've been recovered in recent times, and looking particularly at how over the last 50 years the movement of God in the UK has led us to this point. It was very insightful, very exciting and very inspiring episode, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
But David, you're here today because we're going to be exploring what it means to be an apostle. And as you mentioned in the previous episode, you were recognised and released in your apostolic calling a number of years ago. Mm-hmm. And so throughout this series, we want to hear from the experts, don't we, Kier? So we're asking apostles about apostles, prophets about prophets, and so on and so forth. So the word evangelist is a word that many people in common parlance would know. They probably even would know what a pastor is.
Yeah.
A prophet to an extent, and they certainly know what a teacher is, and many listeners will have images in their minds of school teachers or piano teachers that have frightened the life out of them. But the word apostle, of course, is not really a word that a lot of people use. So, David, what is an apostle? What does the word mean? Where did it come from? And why does the Bible use it?
Wow.
Big question.
Start with a big question. Well, the word is a word apostolos, Greek word, and it means sent or sent forth. It comes from a verb, sounds very similar, apostello, meaning to send out, or to send forth. Okay. And originally, as far as we can tell, the word was originally used as a nautical term for a fleet of ships that would be sent out from their home port. There is another Greek word that also means to send. It's a word pempo, but apostolos is a word that emphasizes a relationship between the sender and the sent.
Oh, very interesting.
The fleet went out representing the place from which they'd gone.
Right.
And so apostolos, apostello have this sense of a commission, of authorization. And some people link that Greek word with a Hebrew word, a salua, who was an authorized representative who would be entrusted and empowered to speak and act on behalf of the one sending them, the one they represented. So by the time you get to the New Testament, I know that's a bit of detail there, but by the time you get to the New Testament, this word is used with the sense of being sent with God's authority, right, and entrusted with a mission.
Yeah,
sent out, sent forth, but with those important connotations.
So who are the apostles then that we meet in the New Testament? And this sounds like a strange question, but are they all the same?
Yeah, lots of people ask this. I think we kind of see 3 orders of apostleship in the New Testament. Okay. 3, yeah. The first, the preeminent order of apostles is the Lord Jesus.
Right.
He is the chief apostle, Hebrews 3:1, and he often speaks of himself being sent by the Father. Apostle is one sent out, one sent forth. Yeah. Jesus talks about himself being sent by the Father. One really important verse in terms of understanding ministry today, Jesus said, "As the Father has sent me, I'm sending you."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that sending is in the nature of with authority, on a commission, as a representative. So we've got the Lord Jesus, the chief apostle. Then we've got the 12. The Revelation calls them the apostles of the Lamb. And they were a unique order of eyewitnesses to the resurrection. When Judas betrayed the Lord, they replaced him to refill the 12, to fill up the number.
So that's the 12 that we meet in the Gospels, people like Peter, Andrew,
there's a
James,
list of them
John.
Absolutely. Okay. A list of them in Matthew 10. Peter, Andrew, James, John, Thaddeus. So those 12, sometimes called 12 disciples, elsewhere called 12 apostles. Yeah. Mark 3:13 calls them apostles. And I think they are, again, a kind of a unique group.
Yeah.
And then, so they were chosen by Jesus during his earthly ministry.
Yeah.
But then Ephesians 4, the verses on which this series is being based, talk about Jesus giving gifts after he had ascended. So the 12 were the 12 apostles given during his earthly ministry, or called and chosen to be with him during his earthly ministry. The Ephesians 4 apostles are those who were given after his ascension.
Okay.
Right.
And first, foremost in many ways amongst those was Paul, who wasn't one of the 12, but was nevertheless saw himself clearly called as an apostle. Barnabas is named as an apostle. James is named as an apostle. Silas, Silvanus is named as an apostle. Apollos is named as an apostle. Timothy, arguably, is named as an apostle, and others. So it's to that third group, that post-ascension, post-Pentecost group of apostles that all subsequent apostles belong, including those that Jesus is giving today.
That's very helpful. That's very helpful indeed.
Yeah. Could you maybe describe then, within that, what some of the hallmarks of an apostle would be? Obviously, there are some named as apostles, so that's kind of helpful for us to understand. But what would that look like for somebody?
That's great. And if just to link with that, there's a verse in Revelation that I think it's written to the Ephesian church, says they've been good at testing those who claim to be apostles. And I just say that because if it was necessary to test the authentic apostles, then clearly there were more than just the 12, and more than just the 12 and Paul, and so we kind of have to disavow that idea. There were other apostles. Features of authentic apostleship that we see in the New Testament. I'd say first of all, there's a deep sense of calling and commissioning. They know they've been set apart for the work. That's how it describes Paul and Barnabas in Acts 13, that they've been set apart for the work. And if you read in Paul's letters, there's a clear sense that he understands himself to have been commissioned, to have been sent, to have been authorized by Christ. He begins nearly all his letters by affirming his calling into apostleship. So there'll be a really clear sense of calling. I think there'll be a deep sense of servanthood, expressed in humility. Paul describes himself as a servant of Christ, in some places as a slave, a bondservant of Christ, and so that there'll be a deep sense of servanthood, and with it a really strong sense of being entrusted with a stewardship. Particularly a concern for the gospel, for doctrine, for the doctrine on which the church is built. The early church, we're told in the book of Acts, was built on the foundation of the apostles' doctrine. One of the things they were doing was laying down a clear body of doctrine, a gospel upon which the church could be built. So I think there's a sense of calling, of commissioning, of servanthood, of entrustment, and then Ephesians 3:5 says that the apostles and the prophets are men of revelation. And I think when you read the epistles, you see that they're motivated by a vision of the bride, of a bride made ready, of Christ's fullness in his church. Paul says that he labors to present everyone mature, and he describes the bride in various places. So there's a real a revelation of what the church should be and will become. There's great patience in outworking those things. And then another thing that's it's really interesting in Galatians, where Paul goes to meet the apostles in Jerusalem, and he meets with Peter, and they establish his work amongst the Gentiles. Paul is working amongst the Jews, and at the end of the passage, Paul says the other thing they asked of me is that we would remember the poor. Which was the very thing I was most eager to do, I think some translations say. And I think that's an apostolic hallmark as well, as a concern for the needs of the poor and the needy.
And I think a word that you used, which I think is quite an important thing to pick up on, particularly in light of something you said just in our introductory episode, is that word serving or servant. Because you discussed in our first episode about not long after the Acts of the Apostles, you saw this hierarchical order being set up, but actually it's important for us to recognize that it's not about a hierarchy, but just the same as anybody else called of Christ. Yeah, they're servants, aren't they? They're there to serve, and as you described, as a function in that. But they are servants.
Well, Jesus said he himself came to serve.
Yeah.
He contrasts worldly leadership, those that lord it over you, with how his followers, his leaders are to be. I just think it's absolutely essential. That's the hallmark of any authentic ministry. Any leadership in the church should be the heart of a servant.
Yeah,
I'm here to serve.
Yeah, and that's an important thing, I think, even as we progress into this season, to keep in mind.
Yes,
but also then even a lesson for each one of us.
Yeah,
there's no point you get to whether it's in calling or position, whatever it is, where you think I have been elevated above servanthood.
I love that Jesus, he says to them, if anybody wants to be great, he must become the servant of all.
Yeah,
and I love that he doesn't dismiss the desire for greatness.
Yeah.
Because I believe God puts that in us. We want to be great. We want to do something great. We want our lives to be great and valuable and worthy and fulfilling. I think our hearts pursue greatness.
Yeah.
But Jesus just redefines it.
Brilliant.
And says this is what greatness looks like.
Yeah.
It's serving. It's being fulfilled in that way. So
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so David, you've kind of talked a little bit about the hallmarks of apostolic ministry.
Yeah.
Could you perhaps describe then in practice what apostles do?
Yeah.
And maybe even look at, are there tasks that would be common to all apostles as well?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I think just to preface this with all apostles are different. So I think every apostle will have a commission which will be unique and personal and distinct. And Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, he kind of contrasts those whose work is planting, who's watering and building. Paul and Peter were different in the people amongst whom they primarily ministered. Paul to the Gentiles, Peter to the Jews. And of course, every apostle has a different measure of gift.
Yeah.
And not everybody's like Paul. And I think another thing, and maybe we'll explore this a bit more later, is every apostle will outwork their apostleship through another underlying gift. So they may be pastoral or more of a teaching ministry or a prophetic ministry. But so maybe we'll come back to that. But broadly, that said, I think the work of an apostle will include the founding and building up of churches. That they are, 1 Corinthians 12 says first apostles, second prophets, third teachers. So apostles lay the foundations upon which the church can be built. The foundation is Christ, and they take time and patiently establishing that foundation. Paul talks about being a wise master builder or a kind of a spiritual architect. There's something of the house that they've seen which holds them firm in laboring until what they've seen is built. And so there's this, the founding, the building up, the strengthening of churches. It's amazing how many times Paul is seen to be ministering, and he says his purpose is to strengthen the churches.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. He's not always starting new things, but he's strengthening what's been started.
Yeah.
So there's the work in the founding, the building up, the strengthening of the churches, always for building up, not tearing down, Paul says. And then within that, I think they function as fathers, in a fatherly way towards churches, towards their leaders. There's a deep concern for the well-being of the churches, and as part of that fatherly ministry functioning towards the churches, they appoint elders.
Okay.
I believe elders should be appointed by apostles.
Yeah.
Acts 14:23 says that Paul and Barnabas appointed elders in every church. Titus 1 verse 5, Paul instructs Titus as his delegate to appoint elders in every place. So the appointing of elders is a task that an apostle undertakes in order to ensure that the church continues to be led and looked after and cared for and governed in his absence by the elders. He's an equipper. Ephesians 4:12, he equips the church. In his case, in the apostles' case, that means equipping the churches to be apostolic. i.e. to have a strong sense of mission, of being sent, of carrying the gospel, of advancing the kingdom. And I think the other thing that some apostles do is develop a sphere of ministry and a team that works together to in ministry and an influence to a group of churches under their care.
That's very, very helpful, very insightful, David. So maybe we can kind of move on to some of your own personal experiences then. So how did you become aware of the Ephesians 4 gifts being for today? And then secondly, how in particular did you come to understand your own calling as an apostle?
Well, if I could go back a bit, I hope this is helpful. I grew up in a denominational setting with no real understanding of the nature or the mission of the church at all. I knew God was sovereign. I hoped that he loved me, despite my sins, but I had little theological understanding beyond that. And a long story short, after uni, I went to hear Billy Graham preaching. I was greatly impacted. I was born again, and I immediately sensed a call on my life. I just believed God wanted me to serve him. I actually had always believed that, even in my Church of England days growing up, I wanted to serve God somehow, and so I presumed that meant ordained priesthood, becoming a vicar. But around that time, Deborah and I were invited to the Dales Bible Week, the mid-'80s, and it utterly changed all our perspectives. We saw and met church leaders who were described as apostles and prophets. It was a concept I'd never heard of, and at first it just didn't seem right. What were they claiming to be? Did they think they were special? And I just didn't get it. But the Lord very quickly showed me it was biblical, it was from him, it was right, and it was essential. I couldn't deny that Ephesians 4 talks about needing these gifts until we reach unity and maturity. Around that time, I felt God speak very clearly to me, a verse in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2, where Paul instructs Timothy to find reliable men who can be entrusted to teach others. And I just felt that was part of what I was being called to do, was to be entrusted with the gospel and to be reliable and to be trustworthy. And I suppose in that was the sense of stewardship was started to be formed in me. And then in the church that we had become part of by that time, we were planted out. The church saw growth. I left my secular work to devote myself to the ministry. Around that time, I met frequently with Bryn Jones, who was involved in the church and overseeing it as an apostle, who was a great encouragement to me. And one day I remember he told me that he believed the seeds of the apostolic gift were in me. I didn't really understand all that meant, but I suppose, like it says of Mary, I kind of treasured those things in my heart and just decided I'd just seek to be faithful in what God had given me at the time and not get distracted.
Yeah.
And then over the following years, I hope this story is not too long.
That's good.
After Bryn's death, I began working closely with Kerry Jones. He oversaw the church that we were leading. And I would just want to say nobody's helped or encouraged me more than Kerry, or shown me more clearly what apostleship looked like. And then a few years later, Deborah and I were recognized as pastors, Ephesians 4 pastors to the church. So we continued to give ourselves to serving, to leading, to caring, to teaching, and began to plant out from our base into some other places nearby. And then 2009, I responded to a request from a Christian in Kenya. And over the years, that work grew, and I was involved in laying foundations for a group of churches there, seeing them grow. So all that to say, over the years, I hope that the fruit has been seen. Believers have been taught, churches have been planted, a good team has been built. But I also began to sense that there was a shifting grace in my own life, I suppose, and that my burden and my burden of care was extending outwards from the local church. And then 5 or 6 years ago, Kerry called our elders and deacons together, and shared with them that he felt we were coming into a whole new season, and asked them to pray and fast and ask the Holy Spirit what gifting he'd put amongst us. So it was an awesome time as we met with the Lord and fasted and prayed and asked him what he was doing amongst us, and he spoke to us to say that he was identifying me as an apostolic gift, and the people I'd been working with all agreed. And so later that year, Kerry came with Brian Shutt, another apostle, and some prophets, recognized prophets, to give public recognition to that ministry and to release me to function in developing my own sphere of work.
Yeah.
I equally decided and stated at the time that I didn't want to be independent of Kerry in any way. I wanted to work together as apostles. And that's what's been happening over the last few years.
You've talked a couple of times as well about not only an apostle sense of call, but a sense of commissioning. So has your sense of commissioning grown? Did you feel kind of that you received a commission from the Lord that you were able to explain and expand upon?
Yes, I did. I felt it didn't come as a new thing.
Right.
It came as a to clarify what I felt had always been in my heart. I felt God just speak 3 very simple words, actually. I just felt he said I was to build beautiful churches. And I felt I'd always been called to build a church. To ensure the foundations are well laid, to show that the walls were straight, to ensure the church was missional, to ensure everybody knew they had a part to play, and that we're Christ's bride, and that we're being made ready for his return. But I felt when God spoke those simple words, it just really clarified everything for me.
Yeah.
And we'd felt for years that God had called us to the towns and villages especially. We felt he said years ago that the church should go from the heart of the nation to the ends of the earth. I remember Kerry asked whether when we told him what we felt the Lord had said about my ministry, that he said, you need to know now, are you a Jerusalem, where James, as far as we can tell, stayed in the city, or are you an Antioch from which Paul and Barnabas and Silas travelled out in mission? And immediately we said we're in Antioch because that was everything that had been growing and emerging over the years, really.
Yeah.
So at this time I'm still working in Kenya. That work has grown, and there's other parts of the UK now where I'm also taking an apostolic function. But I also do know I don't want to go anywhere that God doesn't send me.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
And it's funny you mentioned the villages and towns. Even we're here today in your fantastic facility in South Leicestershire, and before we began these interviews, we bumped into a few friends of ours and a few members of staff here, and both of them were talking about the villages and towns, just in terms of some plans they're making and things they're doing, and that vision has really been ingrained now in a people, hasn't it? It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Okay, David. So, I mean, you made reference to this earlier. Particularly, you mentioned that you had been recognised as a pastoral gift a number of years ago. But you also referenced how the apostolic is often seen to be outworked through the function of the gift. Could you maybe describe and explain the relationship between your gifting as a pastor and as an apostle then? Just help people understand that.
Yeah, I'll try. I understand that gifting grows and develops and matures and kind of comes into fullness.
Yeah.
So I think for me personally, in a sense, I've always felt that I'm a pastor, and that was recognised, I say, quite some time ago. But there's been this emerging, growing, developing apostolic gift that God had also given me, and I think the apostolic gifting came into its fullness in my case as I was seeking to be faithful in pastoring, and God kind of extended the sphere of my care, if I could say that. I think pastors and apostles there's a lot of commonality.
Right. Yeah.
But I think also, but more generally, the apostolic gift tends to function and be outworked through another underlying gifting. So, and we see this in the New Testament. Paul and Barnabas in Acts 13 are named amongst the prophets and teachers.
Yeah.
And then set apart for the work, and then known as apostles.
Yeah.
But Paul later refers to himself in both letters to Timothy as an apostle and a teacher.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think one thing was already clear. He was a teacher, and then he began to fulfill his apostolic ministry, and clearly from what we have in the scriptures, Paul continued to function very much as in a very able, capable teaching gift.
Yeah.
Likewise, Barnabas, I guess, was a prophet. Mm-hmm. He's amongst the people. Peter, at the end of John's Gospel, is called to shepherd the church, to pastor the church, and Peter later describes himself in his first letter, chapter 5, as a fellow elder. Mm. So I'm never quite sure exactly what he means by that, but I think Peter is an example of an apostle who very much functioned through his pastoral gift. So, yeah. Paul as an apostle who functioned with his teaching gift, Barnabas with his prophetic gift. So that's how I see it.
And that's very useful and very useful in helping us understand, like you said earlier on, all apostles, like all the other gifts, they're very different.
Absolutely.
And so it's a fool's errand really to compare one with another, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think when it comes to knowing, I think we might talk in a moment about how apostles work together, but there are different apostles for different situations.
Yes.
If a work needs strengthening in its teaching, then you need that kind of apostle to do that. If the need was to build the body together, maybe you'd need an apostle who had a pastoral background. So,
Well, let's explore them.
It doesn't fit in boxes.
No. Yeah. And you've mentioned some apostolic ministers already that you've worked with, Bryn and Kerry, Brian Shutt, for example.
Yeah.
And the New Testament sets out apostles working together. Mm. So can you describe kind of the working relationships between apostles, both in terms of what we see in the New Testament and some of your experience so far?
It's clear from when Jesus first sends out the 12 that he sends them in pairs.
Yeah.
And he establishes a clear principle that apostles and I would say all ministry, all leadership works best together.
Yeah.
Often in teams, and so the apostles went off in pairs. I think today apostles working together may well involve, and at times needs to involve, literally going into churches together, right? Going as pairs, going to teach amongst leaders together, and obviously we do that well. And going together so that to bring different aspects of their gifting. So if I'm in a situation with Kerry amongst leaders, I know what I bring will be very different to what he will bring. We function differently. I think then maybe a little bit more wider than that. What should be happening, what does happen in our context is that apostles should talk together, share together, discuss together, dialogue together, to establish a common doctrine, to talk through issues that the churches may be facing, common issues we're facing, and not least, simply to support and encourage one another in ministry.
Yeah. And I would certainly say, in my experience, the opportunities I've had to see that happening, whether it's been in settings with yourself and Kerry, or before he went to be with the Lord, I remember a conference that you and Brian did together. Very, very powerful time where you talked about your passion for mission, and Brian talked about his passion for loyalty and covenant. It was a perfect dovetailing of gifts, really. And I've seen that in some other contexts as well, and it really is a powerful thing because there's a multiplicatory factor there, isn't there?
Absolutely. I think the way I understand Ephesians 4, just going to be right back to that, is I think that Jesus, in giving the gifts, gives something of himself.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, I like the version you read. He personally gave.
Yeah.
There's something very personal about Jesus giving the Ephesians gifts to the church.
Yeah.
And I believe each gift comes as another aspect of Christ. And so when you have a multiplicity of gifts, you have a bigger perspective of Christ. You see more of Christ because you see more of the gifts.
Yeah.
And so 2 or 3 apostles together will all bring another dimension of Christ.
Yeah.
The word, we call them sometimes the grace gifts. Grace has this sense of leaning towards. And I love the idea that Jesus, in giving the gifts, is extending himself towards his church again, and giving us something more of himself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah. You've obviously described the working relationship between apostles.
Yeah.
But of course, apostles work with the other gifts as well. And we're, across this season, we're actually going to meet some of the people that are working alongside you in your apostolic team.
Yeah.
So perhaps you could describe the working relationship between an apostle and other gifts as well.
Yeah, I'll do my best. Again, I mean, biblically, we've got just a fantastic example in Paul. He's always with companions.
Yeah.
He's always with brothers.
Yeah.
You know, even when he's in jail, he's got somebody with him. But he chooses to work in a team setting. So, and we don't know a lot of detail as to what giftings the people around him were all the time. Sometimes we have names, but we don't really know what they did.
Yeah.
But he's able to send delegates. He sends Timothy. He sends Titus. He sends other named people into churches on his behalf. So the idea of teamwork is clearly established.
Yeah.
This means a lot to me. Psalm 133 says that when we dwell in unity, God commands blessing.
Yeah.
I think that starts in these kinds of teams. But in particular, apostles are coupled with prophets. We've said that a few times. Yeah. Ephesians talks about the apostles and prophets as a kind of coupling, as a pairing together. I think for me personally, developing a team of other ministries is just essential, because I just genuinely know I need other people.
Yeah.
I have something. You talk to Richard, you might talk to Christopher about the teaching gift. Ian, you've talked about his evangelistic gift. They're all adding things I don't have, and vice versa.
Yeah.
I remember somebody asking me what difference it made to have a prophet with me when I was traveling into Kenya, and a funny phrase came out of my mouth. But the more I've thought about it, the more I think it's right. I said, I just feel much braver.
Brilliant.
Right.
Yeah.
When I've got a prophet with me, I feel brave.
Yeah.
Because I feel it's not just now what I've been sensing. I've now heard the word of the Lord.
Yeah.
So I can go here with so much more confidence in terms of what's needed.
Does that make you think, David, if there's a verse in Peter, is it 2 Peter 3, where he talks about
the word of the prophet and the command of the apostle?
Thank you, yeah. Is that the kind of thing you're referring to, that dovetailing of... Did you find, for example, that having heard the word of the Lord, you could
absolutely
preach, teach, make a command?
Yeah. This has happened several times. In Kenya on several occasions, happened here as well. But knowing that the prophet I'm with has heard from God, has shown me what I need to do.
Yeah.
I have the word of the prophet, and then there can be a command of the apostle. There can be a direction as to what is needed. And this is non-negotiable because the Lord has spoken.
Yeah, and it's established in a matter of 2 or 3 witnesses, I suppose.
Absolutely, yeah. So
teamwork really does make the dream work.
Teamwork makes the church work.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. Absolutely. I just think...
Was that inbuilt in you? Were you always looking to form a team?
Yeah, I guess it was actually. If I I've always. Sometimes it's been. I've always believed that we're much better when we contribute together. I like to be quite inclusive. I like to know what people are thinking. When I was leading the eldership here, before my apostolic recognition, I was one of the elders here. I led the team. There were times when I was really confident. I didn't need to know what anybody else thought because I knew what we should do. But most of the time, I work much better in the collegiate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting. And that leads us on maybe then to another kind of key relationship that apostles have, and that's with the elders they appoint.
Yeah.
You said earlier on, you believe apostles appoint elders. We have it in Acts 14. We have Titus appointing elders on Paul's behalf. So there is kind of an inextricable link between elders and apostles, aren't there? So could you talk a little bit about the kind of maybe the initial and the ongoing relationship that you have with the elders, and maybe even a little bit how that begins before you appoint them? Because I assume, and our listeners may assume, you're appointing elders rather than people applying to be elders.
Yeah, put an advert in the church bulletin. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so well, I think biblically, it's interesting where in the two references you've made in Acts 14 and in Titus 1. In Acts 14, it says after they've appointed the elders, they return to Antioch because they've now completed the work.
Okay.
In Titus 1, Paul says, appoint elders so that nothing is left undone.
Okay.
So I think the appointment of elders kind of is a really essential part of completing the first phase in the life of a church, and the ongoing relationship between the apostle and the elders should be one, I believe, of great affection, of love, of brotherly love. You get that in Acts 20 when Paul arranges to meet the elders in Ephesus, and they're all in tears, because they love each other so much. Yeah. So I think the idea of the apostle, if going back to something we talked about in an earlier episode, kind of being some kind of superintendent, hierarchically above the elders. There is an authority towards the eldership, but their relationship is warm, personal, affectionate, emotional at times. We've had plenty of times where we've cried together because of what we're talking about. It moves us. When we've appointed new elders, one thing I've always tried to take care with is thinking about how the additional man will affect the team and the team dynamic. It's kind of a new eldership every time you add an elder.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we've taken our time over that. Sometimes maybe we take a bit too long, but taking the time because Psalm 133, in my view, is inviolable. The those at the head have to get along together for the blessing to flow into the body.
Yeah. How do you as an apostle know when a church needs an elder or more elders? I can't imagine it's a perfect science, but there must be things where...
No. I've just last week appointed an elder in Kenya.
Okay.
And in the situation there, the church was growing. The man, William, who is setting the pace in all the churches in Kenya, is based in this particular town.
Yeah.
And so he's traveling a lot and frequently leaving one elder. When he's away from home, there's one elder left. So it felt for some time it will be really helpful to have two elders there most of the time. This man had grown up in the church over many years, been a friend of the others for a long time. There was no concern that there'd be any disruption to those relationships. So on that basis, I felt he's going to be a good addition to the team here.
So both kind of the growth of the church itself and the expansion of the ministry of one of the present elders can often lead to the need for more elders. Yes, and I mean, absolutely, yeah. I think we have to have enough elders to adequately care for the flock. Yeah. And ideally, as I say, a plurality in every place. Yeah. But neither can we appoint to fill a gap. Yeah. The elder, there's clearly some biblical criteria for elders that have to be fulfilled. So we can't appoint unless we have
elders who are suitably qualified.
Mm-hmm. And you maintain and sustain a government to the church even after you've appointed an eldership?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah.
I know that's a moot point, but that's what I see scripturally.
Yeah.
Paul clearly had authority towards the churches even after he'd appointed elders.
Yeah.
And
Same
I
as
think an apostle is more than a consultant.
Yeah.
He's a father to the
Good,
church. Yeah.
So Paul has the authority, for example, to insist that the man is put out of Corinth.
Yeah.
John has the authority to call to attention Diotrephes' behaviour in 3 John, for example. So you would see an ongoing kind of governmental responsibility.
I would, yes. I think as an eldership matures, the apostle's involvement may lessen because he doesn't need a mature eldership can begin to function very well. On their own, but they're never on their own. He's a father figure. He'll always be concerned for them. He'll always be praying for them.
Yeah.
He'll always bring the word to them if he feels some interjection is needed.
And I suppose that a maturing eldership, like a maturing church, generally is a source of great joy to an apostle anyway.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. I know when we were in eldership, when I was leading the eldership here, our goal was, one of our goals, our first goal was to please the Lord.
Yeah.
But we also wanted to be a joy to the apostle.
Very good.
And not cause any heartache for him.
That's a good motivation for any church leaders who are sneaking on listening to the podcast. Those are 2 really good motivations for your church leadership, actually.
Yeah. David, could you perhaps tell us a little bit about who or what has helped you in developing your apostolic calling then?
I have had the benefit of some of these questions in advance. I have written an answer to this one.
Seeing behind the scenes there.
4 categories of people I believe have helped me develop my call.
Yeah.
The first is the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And he has helped me steward and nurture the seeds that he put in my heart years ago.
Yeah.
Second is Deborah, my wife, who has encouraged me to give my all to the Lord and to his calling. And without a wife like that, I don't think I could have grown and developed in the way the Lord wanted me to. Then I have to say other apostles, and principally in my situation, Bryn and Kerry Jones in person, an incalculable amount of input and investment that's just been incredibly vital to me over the years. And then some other apostles that I've never met, but I've read their writings. Terry Virgo, Barney Coombs especially, have over the years have absolutely devoured their material. Found it really helpful. And then my fellow elders and ministries, and just the release, the support, the encouragement, the building up at times, the confidence boosting at times of the men and women I work with has been an absolute delight and a joy, and invaluable to me in all that I've been able to do for the Lord so far.
Yeah. Excellent.
Well, David, thank you once again for your time, for your generosity of spirit and the insights that you've shared with us today.
Yeah.
And it's a great thrill for us to be here today. It's a great thrill to have you on the podcast. It's a great thrill for us to see a little bit of what you guys are involved with.
Thank you so much.
We love Living Rock to bits.
Yeah.
And we wish you every success for you and your team continuing to build beautiful churches.
Thank you.
And thanks for joining us on the podcast, everyone. And we'll look
much.
forward to seeing you again very soon.
Bye.